Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Well, some years ago, I bought my wife a turntable as a Christmas present. And since then, she's collected quite a variety of different kinds of music on old LPs, some used, some new. And about 6 months ago, I was watching an auction of a machine shop, and one of the lots, oddly enough, was a whole bunch of albums that had been completely waterlogged. This is what's kind of left of them after we stripped off the nasty, dank, wet album covers and sleeves. We're left here with probably a couple of hundred LPs. Well, I was the only bidder on the lot, and I walked away with these things for $1 plus 18% auction fees. But still, a couple of bucks for a couple of hundred albums. Are they savable? They might be. So I started looking around for ways in which we can clean these things without doing any kind of damage to the grooves. And the only thing that really came to mind was using an ultrasonic cleaner. I came across this unit on Vevor's website. It's specifically designed for cleaning records and albums. But the tank on it's a little bit small. It's only 6 liters. And if I was going to get something like this, I'd want something that would have a larger capacity. Mostly because I wanted to use it for other things than just for cleaning albums. I could use it in the machine shop. But I also didn't want it to be too big either. Well, knowing I wanted to duplicate that Vevor unit with just a larger capacity tank, I started collecting some parts where I could build my own. I found this 1 RPM motor online, as well as some stainless steel drill rod and some other miscellaneous parts, kind of waiting for when I would come across the right ultrasonic cleaner. And about the time that I was researching all this, I got one of those emails from Vevor that some YouTube channels get, in which they say, "Hey, we want to send you a mag drill." Well, I really didn't have a use for a mag drill. So I replied to them and told them thanks, but no thanks on the mag drill, but would you be willing to send me an ultrasonic cleaner? Well, and so they did. And thank you, Vevor, for helping out the channel. But what they sent me was a 10-liter ultrasonic cleaner. 10 liters, about the size that would work well in my shop. It's not too small, and it's not too big. It's heated, which is obviously important. And I think I can use it in the shop for a lot more than just cleaning my wife's new record collection. Although that will be the focus of a video. Just not for this video. This video, I am going to take apart and clean and then reassemble this Argentinian made live center. I believe this came on the 1960 South Bend Lathe that I acquired some time ago. I've never heard of the manufacturer, Horo, H-O-R-O, but it looks to be a fairly well-made live center, although it feels a bit stiff. So I think it's worthy of a disassembly, and we'll use the ultrasonic cleaner to get everything cleaned up, and then we'll repack it with grease and put it back together. I keep saying we, but really I'm doing all the work. You're just getting to watch, and I hope you're entertained and you enjoy the video. There are 2 holes here up on the top, which I'm assuming is for a pin spanner wrench. I'm assuming that this is some kind of a nut. They're pretty caked full of dirt and old oil and grease. Well, there's another hole over here on the side, and digging some of this dirt out, I can feel with this pick like there is a slot in here, so I'm assuming that this is a set screw. Well, to get this set screw out, I've got this small jeweler's type screwdriver. Without a parts diagram, it's always a good idea to make sure that there's not a second set screw behind the first one. Well, the only thing I can see down in there is a little bit of brass reflecting back at me. So it's probably a brass shoe that's underneath that set screw holding the threads in place. Well, while I'm disassembling this thing, I might as well power up the ultrasonic cleaner. It's kind of hard to see these LED displays on camera, but I've got the temperature set at 35 degrees C. I think that's a little bit cold, but at least it'll be warming up while I continue to try to disassemble this. Well, the smallest pins on my pin spanner wrench are still too big for these top holes, so I'm going to try to see if this thing's loose enough to where a punch will get it to move. I really hate using this method because all it does is what's happening here is it just mars up the hole. So I'm going to get a little drastic here, and since I can't make my pins any smaller, I can make the holes a little bit larger. I'm going to drill these holes out here just to a size in which my smallest pin will fit in here. I'm not going to go too deep. I know I have some depth here I could go to, but it doesn't really need to be more than maybe 100 thousandths deep. Well, this thing being a Morse taper, it's a little bit difficult to hold. So I've got a couple of soft aluminum flat bars bent over the vise jaws, and that's what I'm clamping onto the taper with. So hopefully I'll be able to use the spanner here to get it loose. And yeah, it's probably all that dirt and everything that made it a little bit hard to get out, but we'll unscrew this nut and see what's underneath. Well, I'm glad I didn't drill those holes much deeper because it looks like the inside of the nut has a rubber seal on it. I'm assuming that's to keep any of the grease, internal grease, from leaking out, and also to help keep any grit and chips from falling down inside the live center. Well, it looks like there's some kind of bearing down inside here. Clean it out here with a little bit of brake clean. See if I can't read it and see what the bearing number is, and also maybe if this will help me further along in the disassembly. What I can see here by looking down inside here, the bearing has some markings on it. It says Argentina and SKF and 30203. And looking up 30203, that's a tapered roller bearing. Well, that's interesting. I really wasn't expecting to see a tapered roller bearing. Well, there's a threaded cap on the end of the Morse taper. I can take that off. Underneath that cap here is another bearing, which tells me that that live center goes all the way through the tail of this Morse taper. I really wasn't expecting that either. I was kind of expecting this to be a solid tail. I can't see anything, any markings on this bearing, but a little bit of brake clean here. Maybe I can read something. It's a bit gummed up with old grease. What this is telling me now, though, is that live center, in order to get it out of the bearing in front, I need to send it from the back here, from this tail. So I'm going to need to figure out a way to set this up to where I can knock it out from the back. I found a piece of heavy wall pipe in the scrap bin, and I've got the live center setting in it with it nose down. I think if I use a punch here on the back of the spindle, I guess that you would call it, I don't know, does a live center have a spindle? I think I can drive this thing out the front. Okay, well, looks like not just a tapered roller bearing, but it looks like there's a thrust roller bearing in here as well. Looks like one half of the roller thrust bearing didn't come out of the bottom here. I use a pick here to pull that out the rest of the way. It doesn't look like there's anything else in here except for that small bearing all the way down at the other end. There are some markings on this race of the thrust bearing. They were a little bit too small. I couldn't read them. And I'll set the inner race aside here and see if I can't get this other side of the thrust bearing off. Well, I thought that this would come off a lot easier, but I have the feeling it was pressed on. But the race here popped off of the front of the tapered roller bearing. And it almost looks like that tapered roller bearing is also pressed on, although I would think it would be from the rear. I'll try to clean this up with a little bit of brake clean, but I'm kind of a little bit trepidatious about trying to disassemble this any further. If those are pressed on, I could do more damage disassembling them, and the bearing feels great. I don't see that I would replace it anyway. But I do want to remove the small bearing and the back of the tail here. I have a piece of drill rod that's exactly the right size to fit down inside of the live center. It should be able to knock out this bearing pretty easy. Well, I could not see any markings on this even after cleaning it up with some brake clean, but it feels really good and smooth. I feel no grit or anything, so I think that bearing is going to stay. The thrust bearing I think is going to stay. I don't see any reason to try to find a replacement for it either. So I think the thing to do now is just to try to get the bulk of the heavy grease out of all of the parts, and then we'll finish it up by using the ultrasonic cleaner and some degreaser. I have a Ziploc style like freezer bag here, small one, and I'll take all of the parts here and we'll set them down inside the bag. Still a little grease in this thrust bearing. I want to get as much of it out as I can. I really just want to use the ultrasonic cleaner to get the stuff that I can't reach. And getting the chunky stuff is easy. It's getting the small stuff inside the cracks and crevices you can't see is where the ultrasonic cleaner really shines. I'm going to use some Super Clean degreaser. Super Clean has been a supporter of the channel for a little while. They sent this gallon of degreaser to me. So I'll pour some in here till about halfway full. I'll fill it up the rest of the way with just tap water. Doesn't need to be full concentrate when I'm just trying to do a final cleaning. So I'm going to be taking this bag and putting it in the water bath that's in the ultrasonic cleaner right now. And I want to get as much of the air out of the bag as I can just so the bag doesn't float. Well, just a disclaimer here, this thing was full of water before I turned it on and started it heating up. It's not too warm right now. I think it could be a lot warmer. So I do want to bump up the temperature here a little bit. I might take it up even more later. We'll see how this thing does. Now I can go ahead and drop my bag of parts in here with the degreaser. I do it this way so I'm not wasting a whole lot of degreaser. One of the things I really like about this unit is I can set the ultrasonic timer on it for quite high numbers. The other one I had would only go up to about 6 minutes. And this one right here, I can put things in it for 20 minutes and no problem. So we'll let this go for 20 minutes and we'll check back to see how it does. Well, with the timer completed, I can go ahead and turn off the heating element. I don't need to keep this water warm. Well, I must have done a decent job of pre-cleaning because this degreaser is still purple and not brown. I'll save this. I'll use it again later on another project. I can pull some of these parts from the bag and start getting them dried off. I think the ultrasonic cleaner does a really good job of cleaning off the stuff that you think is clean but isn't quite clean. Like this thrust bearing, there's all sorts of nooks and crannies down inside these bearings that you're not going to get even with some brake clean, but the ultrasonic really does a good job of cleaning all that stuff out of there. You do have to do a little bit of pre-clean. You can't just dump it in just full of mud, dirt, and whatever. But it does a really good job of taking care of the stuff that you can't reach. And it's not going to clean off any rust. The outside of this Life Center does have some rust on it and really can't do anything about that, but it did do a pretty good job on the inside of it. I am going to use a little bit of WD-40 on these bearings, not so much as a lubricant, but really to try to displace any of the moisture that might be left over from the ultrasonic. I have one more thing I want to do before I put this back together. I took the main body over to the wire wheel and the Scotch-Brite wheel and just got rid of all that rust pitting. Well, reassembly of this thing is just the reverse of the disassembly, essentially, just with cleaner grease. I'll start with this thrust bearing, just using some general all-purpose grease that I've used in bearing situations before. This should hold up nicely in here. I'll also put some grease down here into the tapered roller bearing. And just for good measure, I'll put some inside the body of the live center. I can start seating the cone race of the tapered roller bearing, but it's a bit of a press fit, so I'm not going to be able to do it by hand. I'll need to use something like this pipe in order to get it down in there. I only want to put enough preload on this bearing so that it turns freely but doesn't have any play. If I put too much on it, then the center won't spin. The race will get seated the rest of the way as I tighten down this nut. Before I seat this all the way, I want to take it out of the vise, flip it over, and install that small bearing that goes at the back. I machined up this tool here so I can tap in this bearing on the back. It's made so it puts equal pressure on both the inner and outer races of this little bearing. And now I can finish tightening this nut until all of the side play is eliminated from the center. The last thing here to do with the live center is to reinstall the set screw that'll keep that nut from moving. With the live center all back together, I might as well chuck up a piece of material in the lathe and give it a try. Well, just by eye, it looks like it's spinning nice and concentric. It doesn't look like it has any kind of wobble in it or run out. So I didn't measure this with an indicator, but I might do that off camera. But just by eye, it looks great. Well, I did put this thousandths indicator on the side of the stock, and just to see how much the needle would move, and it moves some, but honestly, I don't know if that movement is coming from the chuck or if it's coming from the live center. I might need to tighten that nut down just a little bit more. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this live center. It feels really good. It seems to be extremely well made. It's not a brand that I had heard of before. I did ask online if anybody's heard of it, and the only thing that we could find is some Argentinian version of eBay had some version of a live center made by the same company. So they may have been around for a while. I don't know how old this thing is, but it's a very well-made live center, and I think it's going to be my primary live center when I don't need to get real close to the end of the material that's been chucked up in the lathe. I am as equally impressed with the ultrasonic cleaner that Vevor sent. It did a really good job of cleaning the bearings. I know some people say you shouldn't put bearings in an ultrasonic cleaner, and then other people say you can. But it did a really good job of cleaning all of the little bits of grime that I couldn't reach with just brake clean. I've had the opportunity to run a lot of parts through this ultrasonic cleaner. Just about every bit of hardware that came off of the 1960 South Bend Lathe, including these pieces here that are out of the apron, all went into the ultrasonic cleaner in a similar way that the parts for the live center did. All of this hardware was full of grime and grease and dried oil, and especially all the threads on the screws and the bolts. And the ultrasonic cleaner just makes it really easy to do that. And having one that'll run longer than just a few minutes certainly makes it easier to clean up the stuff that's a little bit grimier than the rest. I tried to set the exposure on the camera so that we could read these LED readouts, but they look fine in the viewfinder, but on the video editing here, it looks terrible. But what I'm showing here is that this will let you set the temperature of the water bath up to 80 degrees C, which is about 176 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can run the ultrasonic cleaning cycle for up to 30 minutes, which is pretty significant when you consider the other one that I was using was maybe 6. You can see here it shows the actual temperature too on the right. It's currently 4 degrees centigrade, which is about right. We're in the middle of winter here in Northeast Ohio, so I'm going to set the temperature to 50 degrees centigrade, which I think is 120 some odd degrees Fahrenheit. I want to see just how long it takes to warm up 10 liters of water from 5 degrees to 50. Well, about 40 minutes later, and we're sitting around 29, 30 degrees. The target temperature of 50 degrees was reached at about 1 hour and 25 minutes. I have one of those infrared digital thermometers here, and it's showing that it's actually 55 degrees centigrade, which, I don't expect this thing to be super accurate, so that doesn't really bother me at all, but I am curious if it's close to that or if it's close to what's on the display. I have another way of measuring the water temperature. I have a temperature sensor probe for my multimeter, so I want to take it and drop it in the water bath. Well, the temperature probe for my multimeter is showing 59 degrees, 9 degrees more than what's shown on the display. That's not a huge temperature differential. I'm not doing anything with this thing that would require any level of that kind of accuracy. Now, it will go up to 80 degrees centigrade. I didn't test that because I figured that was probably going to take another hour or so, maybe more, to get up to that temperature. But I think this proves at least that it's not under-reporting what you're expecting it to be. Even though the water temperature is at 120 some degrees Fahrenheit, the outside of the container is here at 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 14, 17 degrees centigrade. It's pretty cold in the shop today. I have the heater running, but it takes a while to heat the space up. So even though the water bath is pretty warm, the outside of this thing is comfortable to touch. So that's good that we're not radiating too much heat and that it's maintaining the heat internally. Not a lot of heat loss. Overall, I'll repeat it again. I'm impressed with this cleaner, and it's going to get a lot of use in the shop, especially when I build that album cleaner so that we can get that $1 lot of albums cleaned up for my wife. Maybe she'll sell some of them and go buy other records. Well, there might be a link to this thing down in the description if you're interested in checking it out. But that's going to be it for this video. I appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, drop me a comment, let me know what you think. A big thank you to all those that have subscribed. Please hit that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot for the channel growth. And a special thank you to all those that help support the channel on PayPal and Patreon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.